Zyw Vh Zosoz yzzo Now, this is the old synagogue in Germany, the Alte Synagoge, as it's called. And it survived the NSDAP. But part of the reason could be that it wasn't part of certain stuff. And in the 1800s, before the 1897 involvement of the Jews in the World Zionist Conference, or whatever the thing was called, the name has just left me. The Christians, they wanted to get the Jews out of their country. And they thought it was necessary for Jesus to return. And let's face it, what was coming under the NSDAP was not the first time that such hatred of Jews was present. Hatred of Semites was less common, but certainly Christians had long had issue with Jews, as you know, John 8:44 has been interpreted for a long time. Asking like it was never interpreted in that way is, you know, sort of nonsensical. And let's look at it a little bit. 8:44. So let's read a Greek version of it. Mais ek patros tu diabolou est kaitas epithumias tu patros amon thelete poiein kainos anthropoktanos han ap archas kai entah al hathaya uk estahken ati uk estin al hathaya en autaps atan lal ciudas acton idion lalai ati use us estin kai o pathar autu. And did I read the right chapter there? Well, okay, it doesn't say the Jews in this chapter, but there's the context here. And we have this father talk, which informs us about the Christian father talk. And it's just like the Zoroastrian father talk. I know that's not the right term, but that's one that people will recognize. And the lusts, the desires. So the Jews weren't anti-nature like the Christians and their take off the natural man and that sort of thing. So the fact that they engaged in the fullness of life and liked the fullness of life, that was, you know, fairly fine. Now what people do, but saying is a murderer from the beginning and in the truth not has stood because there's not truth in him, where he may speak falsehood for his own, he speaks for a liar, and the falsehood from his own, he speaks for, okay, yeah, that's, so there's some issues there, but there's always the us and them talk. But I wouldn't go so far to say that somebody of a different group is automatically turn their back on God, or however you're going to phrase it. But nowhere in Hanuk does it say that, you know, all the Jews have to return, or all the Semites have to return in order for, you know, the Messianic age to come about. It's like if we look at this whole, you know, what does Zion initially see itself? It's, you know, it's referring to a hill, but it's referring to points that stand distinct. And sometimes it's the example of the prophets. Sometimes it's how people look at a particular place. Sometimes it's like a title, and it comes from a root to be dry, to set up, to protect. But we'll get into that elsewhere. But secular Jews, or at least liberal Jews, don't like how stringent some Christians are with the law. Now, if so, the Christians want to set up a state where they're going to enforce all sorts of morality. Now, sometimes this is exactly what Tanakh teaches. So whether it's a death penalty or whatever the case, whatever the punishment or case may be, sometimes stuff will be additional things that the Christians would want for such a state. And I would think that most Jews would probably be more chill with the idea that if they set up a temple and they didn't have, and they just had what worked and fit the basic requirements without coming up with the strictest thing possible, having tens of millions of dollars in gold and jewels and stuff piled up just in case. I don't think, it doesn't appear to me that most Jews even go to synagogue think that that's required. And of course, Christians want to convert all Jews to Christianity because they do not think that monotheism is valid. Now, a lot of Christians don't know what the term means, but I mean, one God, not different personages, that sort of thing. Different names of, you know, essences, sure, but not incarnations and that sort of thing. And the Holy Ghost, even in the Christian side of the Bible, isn't whatever. And so where the Christians often have their own ideas of where to set the map. And, you know, so denying the people on the West Bank and other people a prophecy that you're supposed to be on the side of, well, Christians have kind of gone too far with that. The Jews are probably a little bit more aware of what a Messiah is and all that sort of stuff. And so another thing that we may look at to compare the Christian thing, because but remember, the Christians were, you know, as I think I said already, the Christians were already the ones running the show, at least in the public scheme. So before we go into anything further there of why Jews would differ from Zionism, and I have shared stuff on this channel before from groups that opposed Zionism back during the early days of the NSDAP, and didn't take the side of the anti-fascist organization in what, the 20s, 30s sort of thing. They you know, so they didn't go on that side either. But Hebrews 8:6 Nanidaria for terras that you can lie to rangiasas kai kraitanas estindia thakas mesihas Hatis api kraitasin epangeliais nenam mathatai. And I've talked about this in my Christ is a Lucifer page program, and watch it before you judge. I explains the misconceptions of that term there, but has obtained ministry by so much of a better of covenant, which is better, and promises have been established. And so in that program, I discussed what those covenants are. Now, since we're talking about a place in Germany, let's turn to let's think. I don't want to have everything in this program because I want to space it out into different programs. Jeremiah 31:33 is a reason why Martin Luther might have ideas that would refer to here. So, Kizat Habrit Asher Akrat at Beit Yashral at Shri Himim Hamnam Yahweh Nati Aturati Bakerbam Walabam Aktamnah Wahiti Laham Lahim Wahmah Yahyu Li Lam. And so they're teaching into their innermost being and inscribing it on their hearts, and then I'll be their God, and they shall be my people. So it's a conditional. You know, with the house of Israel, the house of the upright of God can mean a little bit different than an ancestry only thing, but some genetic studies have shown that the Jewish people are as much as 97% not Abrahamic descendants. So, you know, there's that issue. But the point is, they're not God's people just because of that. It's because they're given a covenant. And as I pointed out in that Christ is Lucifer program, that covenant, when the prophethood was taken away from them, they can still be part of the people, that ancestry can still be part of the covenant. And yeah, so Second Chronicles. I forget for a second which Second Chronicles thing. So hold on. Okay, 6:10. You know, after talking about David, one of the messiahs, building a house for his name, and we find that Jerusalem was a place that things were built and built and built. The Israelites were likely not the first people on the game, but verse 10 has we Yahweh at Demru Asher Dember Wakum Chat Duyid Abi Washab Al Kasa Yishral Kasher Deber Yahweh Wabna Habit, Lashem, Yahweh, Alhi, Yisrael. And so a promise was fulfilled. But it was in building the house for the place. But verse 5 is what people bring up. Man masher hutsati at ani marts matsrim labachrati bayer makal shamthi yashralamnud beidlah yut shami shamwallah bachrati Beishlah Yut Nangid Alami Yashral. And the next verse. Wamshur Yushlam Lah Yut Shami Sham Wamshur Banduyan Lahyut Al Ami Yashral. And so the last verse, for God's name to abide therein. It's not necessarily a lineage, it's just talking about the name. And, you know, perhaps even David's not a literal thing. If you take David as the beloved, being over the people. So that's an important thing. But the people being brought out of Egypt, and never was a city chosen among all the tribes of Israel. Now there was a secondary city, and we see reference in the Haggarite Psalms to another place, but certainly during that time, Jerusalem was the place, and still to this day. So those who perhaps don't want to bring it to that ends are, you know, but okay, hold on, there's some and okay, for religious Jews like Orthodox that haven't gone to such political ends, a lot of the opposition to Israel to this day happens to be very strong in the Orthodox Jewish community. I mean, even public demonstrations that don't get very much reporting, like, you know, a tenth of the population did this, you know, in the past 20 years. But they reported very heavily on the other side. Isaiah 50, people talk about Isaiah. Isaiah very well drives home the point that not even the land of Israel and not even Jerusalem can be included in, will automatically be included in Zion. So it gives that context of the thing. But, you know, that submission to God, I forget where in the Talmud it says, but there's a reference to the Mushlim of Shlomo, you know, the submitters, the people of the character of peace and wholeness, they have, you know, they were the true followers of the prophet, and they were such as, you know, Isaiah 55 talks about. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither your ways my ways. Thus declareth. Now, the 10 Commandments don't say the name of God. It just says don't use it in profanity. So I'm not using it in the secular context. People will say Hashem or Mitzputz or is it Mitzputz? That's the reverse thing. And so pause this again here. Okay, so let's close here. Aside from repeating the chant of Alte Synagoge, but Zionism is not even quite this. What people generally mean by that is not quite the same thing as what people mean as like Shabbatai Tzvi. Yes, he created problems with the Turkish Empire that proved himself quite the political threat. It wasn't some religious persecution or something like that when they went after him. And there were other people that created problems of, we want to overthrow your country, and even picking up on the Christian language, some of the Jews, and trying to stir things up, you could say. But Zionism is, yeah, the people don't want necessarily the involvement in these things of the people who aren't religious, because obviously the religious Zionism would be a different sort of movement. Judaism, it comes from more, it's a change from things, but God follower and other such terms made their way into becoming, well, we're going to call ourselves of the tribe. So by the time the second book of Maccabees was written, it got to be something different. But there's still a lot of differences that tend to be the case between Judaism and Zionism. Judaism tends not to be a conquering faith, and it tends not to be, there's a lot of stories of conquering tribes and stuff like this that actually occurred before what we call Judaism, and certain groups rose back up, sort of to reconquer the land, the Bar Kokhba revolt and stuff like that, but the Maccabees, and but Judaism is based on Tanakh, or at least it's based on, at least it's based on, the rabbinic interpretations of Tanakh. That's probably more well known, as I've shown. And Tanakh stands for, of course, Torah, Nebiim, Ketubim. So the law, the prophets, and the writings. And I'm not modernizing my pronunciation, so deal with that. And yeah. Now, a Jew would generally be okay being called a Jew. The Zionists would go around making that their primary thing that they would be called. Zionism focuses on the blood and soil, kind of like, some group that's killed a lot of Jews. And the group that called that group Nazis still ended up being a group that killed a lot of Jews too. So, but not as many as the Nazis, I don't think. In the millions, but not as, well, I mean, the the National Socialists. But so Judaism is supposed to be a spiritual identity, although it's turned into an ethnic identity, and the secular current has resulted in stuff, but it's not the same thing. And Zionism is about the military power and technology and the things of this world. Judaism sees them as a tool. It doesn't reject the world. It just sees the world as a tool. And Zionism, people fighting over in the street over following different opinions of different rabbis and stuff like this. More about it being outer science. You see in the modern state of Israel, there's more sectarian, there's more violence between Jews in reference to things that are just outer signs, like, it's like the blue thread that people would wear. Is it blue or is it purple? The word can mean both. It was traditionally made of one of two things. So there's 4 different combinations right there in the most traditional source. But not all Zionists are Jews, and not all Jews are Zionists. So Zyw Vh Zosoz haben yzzo Lzwvmmh Zyw Vh Zosoz haben yzzo Lzwvmmh Zyw Vh Zosoz haben yzzo Lzwvmmh